As much as we pianists give attention to our fingers when problem arises, giving more attention to our fingers rarely solves problems. I've initially tried not to point out my finger, collapse the joints, or curl the fingers, but just trying to undo the problem that we see in our fingers by putting attention to the fingers didn't work out so much. Our fingers, and especially our fingertips, have the most heightened amount of senses, so it is natural that it draws a lot of attention there. But I've learned that the finger movements are results of activities of different placement structural changes of the bone, tendons, and muscles of the hand and the forearm. And get this, there are no muscles in our fingers. So when we try to fix the problem that we see in our fingers by only trying to undo the problem within the concept of fixing our fingers, we are not addressing the core problem of the movement, which originates in how we use our hand, forearm, and possibly the rest of the body. Obviously, when our fingertip joint collapses or the thumb tightens towards the palm and the fingers curl and point out in all different sorts of weird ways, it is counterintuitive to seek what we are doing in the hands and maybe possibly the rest of the body. But when we start to understand that the finger movements are results of how we are using or not sufficiently using the hands and the forearm, it changes our perception a bit on what we are actually doing to move our fingers. So let's shift our attention, at least from our fingertips to our hands for a moment. We intuitively know how to use our hands. We are equipped with grabbing reflex at birth, and soon enough we know how to let things go. We learn how to spread and adjust our fingers to different tasks at early stages of our lives. Now, when we start learning how to play the instrument, we tend to start injecting concepts outside of our natural and intuitive movement of our body. We listen to instructions given by well-intended teachers such as keep your hands and fingers round, don't flatten your fingers, keep your fingers close to the keyboard, don't tense your wrist, don't move your wrist, don't raise your shoulders, don't stick your elbows out, don't move your elbows out too much, your thumb is too heavy, align your fingers to the keyboard, don't tense up and relax, and so on and so forth. These types of instructions from, again, well-intended teachers oftentimes gets lost in translation somewhere between the line read by the student who is trying really hard to capture the essence of fluent instrument playing. And when I mean teachers, we ourselves could be the teachers trying to police everything in our heads as well, you know. As a result, instead of being aligned to where the body naturally and intuitively wants to be, we start conceptualizing a very specialized way of using our body only specific to the activity around playing an instrument that is somewhat misaligned from the natural body function. Then habits get rooted very strong, and before we know it, it becomes our second nature. Second nature as in it's not our first nature, which is aligned to our natural body function and structure, and it's something that we know and can do so naturally without anybody teaching us how to do it, but something that is acquired as a habit as a result of learning, regardless of whether that is an option that makes us function in the most optimal way. Let me give you an example. When I reach out for this glass, I just extend my body and my arm and open up my hand and grab it without thinking much about it. I don't try to relax my hand and my arms and my wrists and try to round my fingers. I just go at it. Now, our movement on the instrument shouldn't be so much different from what I just did, but we just tend to see variations of extra movement topped over this very simple act. The big one that I encounter a lot among pianists is a phenomenon that I call the broken wrist. A broken wrist is a misalignment of the hand in relation to the forearm. If I put my mug grabbing hand onto the keyboard, we are in an optimal place to function really well. But I often see variations of this wrist misalignment and high wrist positioning like this, and hand twisted away towards the pinky or the thumb are just a couple of them. Unlike my glass grabbing hand and having a good support of my wrist, when my hand is angled away from the forearm and the wrist support is broken. So if I'm playing with slightly heightened wrist position like this, you can see that this is already a derailment of the line. Now my fingers still move and I could play seemingly all right like this. But I'm not feeling the same amount of action in my hand movement and ease in my arms and shoulders as if I were playing in somewhat more a natural positioning as seen with the glass grabbing hand. Now, let's consider the angle of the movement of my fingers when my whole hand is angled away from the natural positioning as seen in this high wrist. My balance is much more grabbing dominant than releasing. And so let me elaborate. If you could try to feel with me the sensation when you go grab that glass, I'm not feeling the same sensation as if I'm playing with a high wrist position. I feel the grabbing force is a lot stronger than what it takes to release. Now, you could experiment by putting your hand, wrist, and forearm aligned to a more natural position, an angle that you might see yourself taking when your hand is just hung from your arm when you're walking or when you're doing something without thinking all so much, or having your whole hand and arm on a flat surface like this. As you can see, both my palm and backside of my hand is actively moving to lift and drop my fingers. I'm actually using a lot more of my back hand, and you could feel and you could probably see that my bones that are extended from my knuckles to the wrist, they are moving on the surface of my skin. And the knuckle joints don't move so much place in the air when I open and close my hand. Here I am more or less in a place where I have a balanced usage of my hand muscles that control my fingers. So we talked about the broken wrist or the misalignment of the hand to the forearm, seen in the high wrist positioning, but the broken wrist could also be seen when changing position from one place to the other on the keyboard. So instead of just putting the glass grabbing hand from one point to the other like this, a broken wrist might happen in between the changing of the position, like this. Often see many variations of this. I think Arthur Rubinstein is a master of movement. We could all learn so much from his playing. He is doing absolutely nothing extra. His hand is doing all the work while he has a very good support of his wrist, and he is doing absolutely nothing beyond his natural body structure. He's extremely expressive and technically versatile, all while his movement is minimum, but at the same time very movable. Let me try to tell you when I think this broken wrist starts becoming a problem. Our hand is naturally equipped with a balance of flexing or grabbing or extending and releasing. We also have muscles that makes our fingers spread and come back together. And I believe that our body's default is perfect balance. So when we are tuned to the balance, we are very functional being. This is where maintenance is important, as our body keeps on repainting our body image, or in other words, understanding of our own body in our head every day according to how we use them. As I explained, when I am aligned with the natural positioning of the body, my hand uses muscles from both sides in more or less balanced fashion. I feel the grabbing and or the flexing and the dynamic of releasing and extending. But when I'm off the natural positioning, like this or like this, I don't feel as much of that balanced feeling. Now, even from a pedagogical standpoint, oftentimes the curling and pointing of the fingers and even the collapse of the fingertip joint is a result of an imbalanced use of the hand muscles that might come from the misalignment of the hand to the forearm among beginner students. So when we work with symptoms of vocal dystonia, we need to think how we could unblock the movement that is blocked. I think the first step is to align the body in a natural position so we could set ourselves up to start using those muscles in the first place that are necessary to balance the movement, or more specifically, unblock the currently underused places, so we are in a place where we could start repainting our body image. The ingredients that I can suggest for successful retraining is fairly simple. Break the barrier. Be able to touch your instrument without dystonic reaction, as I explained in the other video. And then be aligned to your natural body structure and function, and start using both sides of those muscles. Objectively look at the dystonic symptoms and feeling without giving in to the default urge, which is to tense. Tune into the sensations beyond the uncomfortable feeling and start putting attention to where you haven't before, since those sensations might be the missing sensory data in your memory to make sense out of a movement. Now, the idea might be simple, but I know this firsthand that it is extremely difficult to do because of the acquired habit that we have, plus the sensations that are throwing us off, and plus the dystonic reactions that we are experiencing. But as much as you can, I'll urge you to always set priority to setting yourself to be aligned to the natural body structure and function. You might experience more uncomfortable sensations and dystonic reactions even when you do, and so you are naturally accustomed to be navigating away from it. But setting yourself up at the natural place, I think, should always be our number one priority. And of course, I only talked about the wrist problem today, but this kind of fine-tuning should be applied all over your body. And mind you, this is something that we all innately know how to do because we are born with it. But experience and injected concepts misalign us from that natural state. What I think what helps for some people is when we give in and let go of our worries and not address the problem and ignore the bad sensation and just focus on what we enjoy, which of course is the music itself, we tend to be aligned to our natural state. And this is because, again, this is our where we want to be. This is our natural place. So a question I have for all of you is, where in your case you think you have injected concepts outside of your natural state that might have derailed you from where you actually intuitively want to be?